Hi everyone, this is ML, and today's leadership module is going to deal with conflict and stress, and we're specifically going to look at the process. So in other words, what happens that will lead us to conflict and stress, and how the brain processes the information. Let's have a look at our objectives. So by the end of the session, you will be able to understand the concept of conflict and stress. You will be able to explain the link between conflict and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You will be able to describe the three emotional states linked to conflict and stress. Identify how the body and the mind reacts to conflict and stress. And you will be able to understand how the body and the emotions want to fix stressful and conflicting situations. Our quote for the session: we might be the master of our own thoughts, still we are the slaves of our emotions. And this is especially true when it comes to conflict and stress. Because of the specific process that gets followed in the brain, what happens is that we often get stuck in a part of the brain, and that will be our emotional core. And the moment we are stuck in the emotional core, we cannot rationally think about how to deal with conflict or how to manage our stress. So this is what the session is going to be all about, is for you to understand the process that the brain goes through. Because once you can understand it, you can also allow your brain then to let go of certain emotions in order then to achieve a higher state where you can rationally think about dealing with conflict and stress. So let's just talk about the different types of conflict that we experience. The first one is the bigger picture conflict. It is generally things that happens in our environment over which we have got very little control. It's called macro conflict. Then we get what is called small group conflict. That is generally when groups fight against each other, or they don't agree with another group's standpoint. In the workplace, we would look at different departments that don't get on, so that will be called interdepartmental conflict. The most common type of conflict that we get is between people, and that is called interpersonal conflict. So it's the conflict you have with other people or other people have with you. The most interesting conflict, though, for me is called intrapersonal conflict. That is the conflict that you experience within yourself, the stress that you build up within yourself. So intrapersonal conflict refers to when you've got expectations for yourself and you don't believe that you are achieving it. It causes stress and it causes conflict. It's got to do with your battle between your emotions and your thinking. So it's a very interesting part of conflict. And for me, it is always the foundation of all conflict, because if you can sort out the conflict and the stress in your own life, it will ripple through to your relationships and how you deal with people in your team. But seeing that we are talking about workplace here, let's just have a look at some of the most common causes of workplace conflict or stress. Now, this is a list that I've just put together after I've done research on the internet on the different types of conflict and the causes of conflict in the workplace. Please go and have a look at Google. You can just put in what causes conflict in the workplace, and it will give you different research, different ideas on what will cause workplace conflict. But I found these quite interesting. So the first block is going to talk about your environment. So it's external conflict. And one of the first ones, and one of the most interesting ones, let me rather put it that way, is noise. Noise causes extreme stress on the body. And the reason being is that your ears are one of the most important tools to keep you safe. because it's continuously listening to things that might harm you. So the moment that there's a lot of noise around you, your bottom part of your brain needs to work so much harder to pick up things that might place you in danger. And it is that extra effort that that part of the brain needs to put in that causes stress and that can lead to conflict. Lack of privacy. What an interesting cause for conflict and for stress. And I often found that companies don't consider that at all. And in the last few years, we've seen the growth of these big open plan offices. And the whole idea was to get the team to work together better. But what we forget is that within a team, we've got individuals. And each individual has got their own personality, their own way of working. And often when we work together and it's in an open environment, it affects our personalities. I specifically know that I struggle to work within a team that is continuously looking at me, because I might have my odd quirks and the odd ways that I do things that makes me productive. So the lack of privacy is a very important concept that we need to consider when we look at the environment and creating an environment where people can be productive. Oh, poor temperature control. What an interesting study. Research is very clear on the impact that temperature has got on stress and on conflict. So, one of your great survival needs is the need to be warm. So if you are in an environment where it is very cold, your brain will shut down as it believes that you are in a state of stress. And the moment it shuts down, it's very difficult to use your rational brain. Then we've got the other side, heat. Heat is directly linked to conflict. Research has shown that the warmer you are, or the more hot the environment is around you, the warmer your body temperature becomes. And immediately you will go into fight and flight mode. And often it is fight mode. There's a direct link between anger and heat. And then, of course, inadequate facilities. It's all good and well to have a great job, to have a great job description, but if you don't have the resources that you need, you cannot do your job, and that places stress on you as the employee, and then that can often lead to conflict. So, some more external events or your macro events would be something like traumatic events. Now, there are some types of jobs that are more prone to having injuries, and people know that. So the moment they go to work, their brains will automatically go into safety mode as the job that they are doing is dangerous. But traumatic events can also refer to something like COVID-19. And I don't think people even realize the impact COVID-19 has had on the individuals, on their families, on their children, let alone how we deal with things in the workplace. Because of COVID-19, the way that we work has changed, and that might be very traumatic for some people. Another external factor which we especially find with lower employees is they've got very little control over events and changes. There's a big gap between management and your frontline employees. And often managers will come up with events or changes that they believe will of course lead a company to a greater future. What they don't often understand is that those changes will have an impact on the stress levels of their frontline staff, and that it will often lead to intrapersonal, interpersonal, and even small group conflict. Even worse is if those changes are very rapid. So it happens very quickly. and we do not allow people to adapt to these changes, or we give them very little time to learn new skills. And if we link this to COVID-19, at the moment there are so many companies that had to close their doors because of the traumatic situation that COVID-19 has caused worldwide. The lockdown alone has had a great impact on companies, and therefore so many companies need to retrench. So what does it mean for those people that still got a job? Well, in the back of their mind, they are continuously thinking, when is it going to happen to me? Or does this mean I'm going to have to do this job for the rest of my life because there's just no other job opportunities? Let's get a bit closer to home, to the actual workplace. So a great stressor is inadequate job descriptions. People need clarity and stability because that allows them to feel safe. And the moment that they feel safe, they are able to produce more. Task assignments. Often people are given the wrong tasks or too much of a task, and it doesn't fit in with their job descriptions, and this causes conflict. And of course, there's the heavy workload. One thing that we need to remember is that the brain and the body can only take as much. And if we don't think about that as leaders, we will burn out our people. The same then is true of long hours and shifts. An interesting one is unnecessary routine tasks. I know that most people know that 80% of their job it would be routine tasks. But there's nothing as frustrating and as stressful as tasks that really do not add value to the company, to the job, and to the individual. There are so many tasks that should have been made redundant already, but we keep on hanging on to them because that's the way we've always done it. Ignoring the worker's skills. Most people, even at the front line, are proud of who they are, and that means what they have learned. It might not be in the form of a degree, but it could be in the form of experience. And if we ignore this and we don't give recognition where the recognition is due, it adds stress to those workers and it will lead to conflict. And there's nothing as frustrating as job expectations that are uncertain or conflicting. So this is very important for a team and the executive team, because you need to speak from the same mouth. You need to have the same foundation, because it causes tremendous stress when the manager says one thing, the supervisor says another thing, and the team leader's got no clue who said what. And then, of course, the lack of advancement opportunities. It is in most people's nature to want to move forward. And if you're stuck in a job where you see no opportunities, it causes a lot of intrapersonal stress. And then, of course, management styles. And for me, two of the worst styles will always be the autocratic, it's my way or the highway. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, the laissez-faire. Well, you know what? You need to make your decisions for yourself. Both of them cause extreme stress as it makes people feel unstable. And then, of course, like always, poor communication. It surprises me how many managers actually think that they are very good communicators, when in the meantime, they might be some of the worst communicators that you can find. Communication is a skill, and it's something that you've got to learn, and that has got to be a strategic point on management development, is teaching managers how to communicate correctly. Now, for some employees, the lack of being part of decision making will cause them stress, especially if there's a big divide between management's experience and the frontline people's experience. It is your frontline people who are doing the operational jobs, and they understand the problems much clearer than those at the top. And yet it is those at the top that then make the decisions on how the job should be run, what decisions should be made, how problems should be solved. Then we get unreasonable demands and unreasonable timelines and deadlines. There's nothing as demotivating as a manager who procrastinates and then comes to the team and says, now you've got to pull your socks. Unreasonable timelines and deadlines places tremendous stress on their employees. Too little authority. And we often here look at the role of the team leader and the supervisor, where they've been given the title, they've been given the responsibility, but in the end they do not have the power to make decisions that will ultimately benefit them and their team. And this one is vital: unfair labor practices. It is not fair, and it places tremendous stress on people when certain rules apply to them and they don't apply to the managers. And that is something that we have got to examine in the workplace. The disciplinary code is there for a reason. The performance management code is there for a reason, and no one should be exempt from it. And everyone should be treated the same. Now, on the other spectrum of too little authority, you might also have people that now have got too much responsibility. So we want you to excel, and we think that, listen, if I give you more responsibility, but in the end, you might be wearing too many hats. So instead of just being a team leader or a supervisor, you've also become this team's coach. You're also sitting on that committee. You're also having to be part of that sports events. So then you are wearing too many hats. I hope this gives you an idea of the different causes of workplace stress. Of course, there are many more. Have a look at which ones affect you the most. So let's have a look at a definition for conflict. There are many, and we are specifically using Robbins from 1998. He says that conflict is a process that begins when one party experiences or perceives that another party has negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something that the first party cares about. Okay, so the important words. It's a process that's got to be experienced, or it's the way that we see the process. And generally we will see it in a negative light. That is why it's called conflict. Please understand that it's not always negative. In stress, you might have a positive experience, but it will still have the same impact on your body. But for conflict, we focus on the word negative. And then it's got to be something that we care about. And we will look at those in more detail. So what is stress then? Well, stress is a physical, mental, or emotional factor or factors that causes bodily or mental tension. So let's combine the two definitions together, and then we can say that conflict and stress is a process that begins when one party experiences or perceives that another party has negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something that the first party cares about. Now, the factors then could be physical, mental, or emotional, and it can cause bodily or mental tension. So let's examine the word process in more detail, because we say that is a process that begins. Now, it can begin with any activity or action that a person might feel that's going to negatively affect them. That action could be physical, so they are physically threatened, or it could be an action that threatens their emotional and their mental state, like for example criticism. It will then follow a specific course, and it is something that develops. Sometimes, if it is a physical activity or action, it might cause an immediate reaction. Other times, for example, if it is a mental activity and people are continuously putting you down, continuously putting it down, it will develop anger or some kind of negativity within you over a period of time. But the one thing that we are very clear on, be it something that happens immediately or takes its time to develop, is that it follows a specific route. And we are going to look at that route in the brain a little bit later. So the next part of the definition that we've got to examine then is then when a party experiences or perceives that something is wrong. Now, the definition of the word perception is to become aware of something through our senses. And what is quite interesting is it's going to follow a direct route to your brain then, that's then going to tell you what that experience and perception is all about. So the first thing that will happen is information flows to your brain through your senses. So it is what I see, hear, touch, taste, smell, and feel. That information will then provide a signal to the brain. Now, what is interesting about that signal and about that information is as it enters your eyes, your ears, your other senses, it is still what we call raw information. At this stage, it doesn't mean anything. What will happen next is once it now enters the neural pathways, your brain will search for similar information so that it can start making sense about the information that it has received. So now it becomes data. The brain will search for similar information. In other words, it's going to look for a pattern. Have I seen this before? Have I heard this before? Have I touched, tasted, smelled? Have I felt this before? Now, in any culture, we will use our language then to label that sensation or that data. Now, these labels that you are given will come from past learning. Someone taught you that that color equals red, that that sound equals danger, that that feeling means that you are sad. And some of those labels might come from your instinct. So quite interesting is your fear of spiders. You might not have been taught it, but it's your instinct that will tell you to be careful of it. Now, if it is similar, not the same, and this is quite interesting, it doesn't have to be the exact information. It just needs to be similar. The brain will then match it with that label so that it can give it some form of meaning. It's got to mean something if I feel like that. It's got to mean something if I hear that. Now, those patterns and meanings will then have specific thinking attached to it. So the first thing is it will have an affective meaning. In other words, my emotions will be reacted or touched by it. Or it might have a symbolic meaning. Now, what is very interesting is that if all of this is a learned process, the information that we receive then is very subjective, and that is the thing about conflict and stress. It is different for every person. And also important then is you will then decide if that pattern and that meaning is something that I should care about. If it doesn't affect me emotionally, I will not be upset about it. If it doesn't mean anything, it will not affect my stress levels. But the moment that I have attached a meaning, an emotion, or a symbolic value to it, I will now start caring about how it affects my life. But we need to be very careful. Have a look at this picture. Do you see the old lady or the young girl? You can stop it here if you need to look at it in more detail. Now, what does it teach us? It teaches us that our brain will pick up what is important to it or what we have learned from the past. But the question really is that information that we have gained throughout our lifetime the truth? Or is it something that we have made our truth? And could there be a different way to look at it? For those of you that's done this activity before, you might see both the old lady and the young girl. But what is interesting, the one that I saw first many years ago was the old woman. And even if I can see the young girl now, my brain will always see the old woman first. And that is something we need to consider. Because of the patterns in our brain, we might always go back to our old ideas about conflict and stress and people and feelings. But because I've learned something different now, I don't just have to see it in the old way. I can now go and find the young lady or a different meaning or a different perspective about things. Let's just be very clear on the words. We've got to understand that conflict has got to negatively affect us, or stress has got to negatively affect us. And that effect generally starts physically, and it will then move on to your emotions, and only then will it go to your mental processes. And it's got to tell you that you are in some form of harm. Now, just something interesting here. Not all stresses are negative, but it still triggers the same bodily and emotional responses, which mean it's still got a very tough effect on your mind and your body. So let's have a look at how the brain gets affected by stress and by conflict. So we go back to the word process, and we're specifically going to look at the route that it follows within your brain. So when you are in a conflicting situation or you are stressed, the first part of the brain that will get activated is your survival brain, because you think that you are in danger. Now, that doesn't have to be just physical danger. It could be emotional and mental danger as well. The second part of the brain that will then get activated is your safety brain, that is now going to say, hang on, here we've got a problem, or hang on, this is going to negatively affect me. And the third part of the brain that it will affect then is called your emotional core, and we'll talk more about it in detail. Now, what we need to understand about that part of the brain is, due to the strength of it, it will immediately overrule the top part of the brain, and these are your options when you operate in the bottom part of the brain. You will be able to fight, flight, freeze, and please. Now, you do not have a lot of choice over it, because your brain has been developed for one thing and one thing only. It is for your survival. So what it will do is release chemicals that will then trigger the safety, survival, and emotional brain. And those chemicals are so strong, is that it will override the top part of your brain. It basically washes over that top part of your brain, and it goes and lies in between the neurons so that there can be no neural activity. So let's just have a look at it. It will be fight. Your instinct might be to immediately fight. Some people's instinct then might be to flight, run away. Other people in conflict or stress situations will freeze. They do not know what to do. And other people will go into please. They'll beg for their life. They'll beg for survival. Now those three parts of the brain, because they are so extremely strong together, can be the most dangerous part of the brain, because it overrides the top part of the brain. And it is in the top part where we really can solve conflict and stress. But if we keep on living within the chemical realms of your safety, your survival, and your emotional brain, your only way that you will perceive and experience conflict and stress then is in fight, flight, freeze, please mode. And those are only 4 modes. There's got to be more than that. If we keep on carrying on in that brain, it becomes what I call your golem brain. It will take conflict, it will take stress, and it will start going, my precious, it's my anger, it's my fear, it's my love, it is my sadness. And what will happen is it will start to consume you. So if we go back to that consumption and what it is then on your mind, in other words, things that you care for, we're going to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So let's start with your survival brain. It could be things like your basic needs. It becomes my precious. I need to have food, water, shelter, warmth, sleep, shelter, and air. Of course, those are important needs, but if it gets to the point that it is all that you care about, so it becomes pure material wealth, then it becomes your precious. If we go a step higher to your safety needs and also your emotional core, we're really now going to look things like always needing to feel safe, always wanting to be loved, always needing the affection and attention of others, always believing that I am the one that people should hold in high esteem. In general, there's nothing wrong with those needs. As we have learned from the motivational video, those needs are important as they form the foundation of our growth. But it becomes your golem needs if you allow your brain to get stuck in them. So if your care is then stuck in those bottom needs, you will never be able to become knowledgeable about conflict, to find real meaning in stressful situations, to become aware of who you are when you deal with conflict. You will also forget to have a look at the beauty of conflicting situations and stress, and therefore you will never be able to grow personally, and then in the end help others to grow. So conflict will lead to a disruption of a desirable state of harmony and stability in your world. And we've looked at some of the safety and survival needs, but I want to talk a bit more about your emotional core. Because if you don't let go of your need to survive, your need to feel safe, the only other place that will give you that satisfaction that I am now in harmony and stability will be your core emotions. And the core emotions are love, joy, anger, fear, and sad. Just something of interest, if you look at them, there's 2 positives and there are 3 negatives. But even your positives can become negative if it is used to solve conflict or release stress in a negative way. One of our objectives was to recognize the emotional states that we enter into when we are in conflict or when we experience stress. So, based on research, they have found that there are 3 different emotional states. And we will explain each one in more detail, but here are the states. So, an emotional state is when something gives you pleasure, or then the opposite, displeasure. We also measure an emotional state by the amount of arousal that it creates within your body and in your energy. So we've got arousal and non-arousal. That refers to the energy levels that you will feel within your body and your brain. And then the third emotional state would be, how do you express your emotions? And there the state refers to dominance, which another word for it is your aggressive state, or then submission or your submissive state. Now, this will lead us to an emotional state, and we said in our objective is you need to be able to identify these emotional states. Now, your first state is your pleasure, and then the opposite, your displeasure state. So obviously, if we look at the emotions, the one that will give us pleasure, in other words, that will provide us with harmony and stability, is joy and love. On the other side, what gives us displeasure in life is anger, fear, and sadness. All emotions that you can experience in conflict and in stress. If we just look at what gives us pleasure, be very careful, because if you operate in the emotional core and you don't let go of it, your golem brain will find the joy and the love in anger, in conflict, in putting other people down, in seeing conflict as something where I have got to win. Your second emotional state is quite interesting. It's called arousal versus non-arousal, and it's got to do with the amount of energy you will use when you are dealing with conflict and stress. So the obvious one that we always strive for is joy and love. And that is the one where we would put all our energy in. It's our arousal state. Anger, fear, and sad is now very interesting. You will notice that we have put arousal under anger under arousal. Now, how does that work? Because it's an emotion that arouses so much of your energy. It is the energy to want to fight. It's the energy to want to take revenge. Now, if you use anger to get to joy and love, you will then find joy in hurting other people. You will find love and hurting other people by either giving them too much love, which equals jealousy, or taking away love from them. Your non-arousal states is fear and sad. We don't want to expend that energy. So we therefore then either become fearful to take on things, or maybe fearful to find joy in our life, to find love, and we therefore become sad because we do not have joy and love. I read an article the the other day that says the reason people don't want to fight or deal with conflict is because of the amount of energy it takes from your brain. So we would rather not extend that energy. But what are your other options then? It is fear and sadness. So the third emotional state is called dominance and submissiveness, and it's the way that we express our joy and love. Now, your dominant one that will give you a sense of stability then is anger. Anger is an aggressive state. And in today's world, we value anger. And it should not necessarily be something that we value. Because if it is your dominant emotion, you will do anything at any cost to have joy and love, even meaning that you've got to put others down. Your submissive state then will be fear and sadness. And it's the opposite of anger, where I will abuse others. In fear and sadness, I will give away who I am so that I can achieve joy and love. In neuro-linguistic programming, there is a principle that states that the mind and the body is one. This means that what you experience in your brain will have an impact on how your body reacts, and vice versa. What you experience in your body will have an impact on the way that you think. So a team of biomedical engineers in Finland mapped the bodily reactions to emotions in 700 individuals in the world, and we're going to have a look at what they found. These are linked to our core emotions as listed here. And they are also linked to the emotional principles of pleasure versus displeasure, arousal versus non-arousal, and dominance versus submission. So what they did is they would then rate it according to these emotional states, and they would map it by using colors, where your highest form of emotional state would be yellow and your lowest form would be light blue. So to do that, they looked at what would the body look like in a neutral position. And this is the map that they came up with. Now from this, they would then measure the other core emotions. Let's have a look at them. Starting with fear, which is most probably the most basic of emotions, as our ultimate purpose in life is to survive, be it physically, mentally, and emotionally. As they've put people through the study, they found the following reactions in the body. So anxiety, which is a form of fear. Have a look at how it affects the body. So if we start off with the light blue, you would notice that when people suffer a form of anxiety, their legs and their arms are not able to move because it's very low in energy. But if you look at the area in the chest where the breathing comes from and their heart rate comes from, look at the extreme yellow that people experience there. It then also affects the areas around the heart and more towards the stomach. So we have found that people who suffer from anxiety will also have some form of a stomach problem. be it a runny stomach before they've got to do a great presentation, or it could even be something like colon that then cramps together. Let's go back up to the head, to the brain space. What you will notice there is that there is an area that is not affected, and that is the top part of your brain. So what does it tell us about anxiety? That if we can learn to control it, that part of the brain is available to support you. Extreme fear. So for example, if you are sleeping and you're hearing someone breaking in, have a look at how that affects the body. So the difference is your legs can move. There's not the light blue there. Your heart rate will increase, but it doesn't affect the full chest area. The focus is more on the heart. And then there will be a red middle of the line energy within your throat down to your lower body. Once again, let's have a look at the head. What is quite interesting here is the area around the mouth. That area doesn't show any form of interaction. So what is quite interesting about that, there is very low dominance or no high dominance, and that the energy level there is not affected. Often what that also means is that when we are in an extremely fearful condition, we cannot voice who we are because that's the complete neutral state. So that is also a survival instinct. When people is in extreme physical danger or they fear what is going to happen next, they might not be able to shout and scream. And the reason for that being is that when you are in that danger, if a sound comes from your mouth, it might let the person who is there to harm you know where you are. That is for physical danger, and it makes sense. But when it comes to emotional and mental danger, it is exactly that area that also stops us from expressing how we feel. And then what happens, because we cannot move past that emotional state, that fear then will go into the rest of our body. Let's move on to anger. And as we know, anger is high in dominance, it's high in energy, and it is sometimes also high in pleasure. There are some people that gets pleasure from anger. But in general, it is an area that causes displeasure. Now, if we look at anger, have a look at the very little low that you will find. So people that are angry, really angry, will show extreme high dominance. And if you look at it, look at where that dominance lies. It lies in their hands. So in other words, the ability to make a fist. It lies in their heart, which means the heart rate pumps, which will trigger your adrenaline and it will trigger your fight response. And now the opposite to fear, have a look at the top of the head and at the mouth area. It is completely yellow, where in fear you are not able to express. People in anger would be able to express themselves. Please note that that expression would be that of dominance. And if you go to the top part of the head, where in fear we still had an area that we could use to rationalize because it wasn't affected by the reaction of that emotion. In complete anger, people lose all control over their rational brain. And that is why often they will say and do things that they will then later not remember or, of course, regret. Contempt, what an interesting word. Another word for it is a form of hatred. It's a form of extreme dislike. So when you feel contempt towards a person, have a look at the areas that gets affected. So number one, we go down to the libido. If you feel contempt for a person, make no mistake, especially in your marriage or in a relationship, you will not have sex with him. But then it goes higher and it goes into your vocal area. So if you look at the chest area there, it's all in the throat. So contempt is the expression of dislike. But what is quite interesting is that it's stuck in the throat. And I want you to have a look at people that shows a lot of contempt. Often they will not be able to express it, but their necks will. So their necks will become much bigger and there'll be a lot of stress within their neck area. If you go up higher, look at their eyes will show contempt, and then some people will also then speak about it. So their words will come out in dominance and anger. The difference here between anger and contempt is that the top part of the brain is available to be used. So what you've got to do is to learn to control contempt as an emotion and as a body reaction. And then disgust. Now, disgust in a physical sense is when you drink milk that is off. Your first instinct is to want to throw up. And as you can see it, look at the yellow area that we've got around the mouth and the throat. But when we look at disgust, when it is a form of emotion or a mental, you're thinking about people in a way that disgusts you, have a look at how it affects the rest of your body. Now, it definitely goes down into the stomach area and it actually creates acid. So that acid reflux is a direct symbol of you not liking something, be it what you've eaten, be it a person, be it an emotion. Also, look at the top part of the brain. You know what? Disgust is a choice. It's not like anger, where it's an immediate response to drive you to fight. Disgust and contempt is a choice, and it's something that we've got to learn to control. Sad. If we look at sadness, have a look at how blue it is, how low the energy is. And it doesn't have the extreme high that we would have in anger. So it's very middle of the road when it comes to the color grid at the top. But one thing about sadness is, if you really look at it, people that are really sad, so they're not just acting that they're sad, will have very little ability to move their arms and their legs. It is when you literally sit down and you start crying, and look at the area then for your eyes and in your throat. It is an area that is in the middle, and that is where you feel your sadness, and it will often lead to tears. But I also want you to note at the top part of the head that the mouth is black. So in other words, often people that are sad, their sadness sits in their throat and you can hear it when they cry. And very often they cannot express why do they feel sad. And this is where people get criticized, because we would say, but this person is not saying anything. Another person passed away, but it looks like they've got no reaction. You're correct. They do not have a reaction if you look at the area around the mouth and you look at the hands and the legs, because the body has gone into that kind of stress. But look at their heart. It's a broken heart. That heart area is broken and it is hurt. Now, your extreme sadness is what we will then classify as depression. And I want you to have a look at that. It is all blue. So people that suffer from extreme depression do not have the ability to get themselves out of it, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So how do we know that someone is suffering from extreme depression? It is by their lack of movement, by their lack of ability to get up and do basic tasks, by their lack of ability to express who they are and how they feel. If we just have a look at it, it's a bit of a combination between anger and sadness. We get what is called shame. Why anger? Because if you look at the mouth area, it's moving more towards the dominant feel. And in that sense, people that are often in a shameful position will try and explain what they have done wrong so that they feel better about themselves. Interesting about shame is look at the yellow around the eyes. People that have done something that they are shameful about will often cry. And then it also goes to the pit of their stomach. It's a feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach that you have done something wrong. But we're going to add one more. And if you look at the word surprise, it should really be a joyful emotion. But it's very, very close to the same effect that shame has got on your body. Apart from, it's not really in the pit of your stomach. But look at the eyes. People cry. If someone is really surprised, they will shed a tear. So if you throw a surprise party and the person sheds a tear because they really didn't expect it, you know it's a truthful reaction. If they don't, someone told them that they had a surprise party. Now we're going to go to joy and love. Very interesting emotions. Pride, which gives us joy. As you can see, it's all in the chest area. So literally, people that feel extremely proud will push out their chests because that is where the emotion is situated, in their chest and their shoulders. Have a look at Usain Bolt. He's always got this big chest that displays his pride. And you can look at someone's face when they have achieved something great. It literally shines. It lights up with joy. So it is high energy, high dominance in the sense that it's a victory for them. And of course, it gives high pleasure. And here we go to love. Now, love is very interesting. Have a look at the face. The face also shines with love. But there's some area of the brain that is not as extremely lit up. But make no mistake, when you are in love, you don't really use your rational brain. You still use mostly your emotional brain. But there is space. It is that area where we're not as dominant. And then we go down to the throat. Look at the throat that is yellow, the expression of love, words that express how I feel about it. And then it goes to the chest because it is your heart that is shining. And of course, unlike disgust, it goes straight down to the libido. So when you're in love, what do you want to do? And then the most dangerous of all emotions when it comes to your physical well-being is in actual fact happiness, because unlike all of the other pictures, there's movement in your full body. So your legs want to move, your hands wants to move, your head wants to move. And if you look at it, the chest is all about displaying I am happy. It's open-chested. Look at the face shining. So why is it the most dangerous? Because in that extreme dominant state and that extreme pleasurable state, you're going to hurt yourself. We often say to kids when they run around and they're extremely happy, we say to them, stop running around. You're going to get hurt. And most of your accidents, by accident, happens when you are happy. So this is really just to look at how your mind and your body reacts. So what if we can use it the other way around? What if I introduce movement to my whole body? Would it then stimulate the happiness in my brain? Well, researchers believe that that can be done. So if you want to stimulate an emotion, you need to stimulate that part of the body. And the same would be true if we go to anger. Heat creates anger in the body, and that anger will then create an emotion in the brain. So the question, of course, is there an ideal state? Yes, it's a balanced state. It is the balance between understanding that extreme pleasure can be as harmful as being in a state of displeasure. That extreme arousal might have a negative effect, just like if I am not aroused or don't feel any passion for a person or a project. And then, of course, dominance and submission. Both of them unhealthy emotional states. So the ideal place for us to be is in the middle. And the word for that is assertiveness. It is the ability to balance your mind and your body, your expressions and your thinking, so that it uses a bit of dominance, a bit of the energetic state, and a bit of the pleasure state. Because it's within the balance where we will teach our brain then to go forward to the rational brain, because we will not get stuck in the survival, the safety, and the emotional core as long as what is required. So this video looked at an introduction to conflict and stress management. And it starts off by looking at your brain and then how it affects your body. So just to clarify, conflict and stress is something that leads to the disruption of a desirable state of harmony. And that desirable state is your state. And harmony describes what is important to you, so something that you care about. The one thing that we do need to know is that the brain will always want to be in harmony. And it's your definition of harmony. For you, harmony might be extreme dominance. For you, harmony might be extreme submission, because I would rather not fight so that I can be happy. And how will your brain want to fix it? Well, it will ask any question. Who, what, when, how. But look at the word. Not how am I going to fix it? How am I going to feel better? And that is an emotional state. It is a state of survival. And what your brain will do is it will want to fix it immediately. Because being in a state of disruption makes your body and your brain feel uneasy. So your brain will want to fix it instantly. And how does it do it? Well, it will make your body react. And when your body reacts, it will trigger a set of chemicals in line with your emotions. So basically, if we look at it, your survival, your safety, and your emotional core will be linked to chemical reactions, the work of the hormones, and neurotransmitters to make you feel better instantly. The problem with that is that the moment those chemicals get released, they wash over the top part of your brain. So in other words, you cannot use your rational brain to start thinking about how do I solve these problems so that they don't occur again, or so that I can learn a lesson, or so that I can grow relationships. And that is called the executive state. Also, if you keep on living in your emotional state, you will exhaust the chemicals and you will exhaust your body's reaction to fight and flight. So, what do we mean by the executive state when it comes to conflict management and stress management? Well, it's the state where we are willing to learn. It is the state where we will look at conflict and stress not as a reaction, but as a problem that we can solve. And it is the area where I will take responsibility for my own life in a non-dominant and a non-submissive manner. In other words, in an assertive manner, where I understand my wants, my needs, my rights, without infringing on the wants, the needs, and the rights of others. Back to Abraham Maslow, that said one can choose to go back towards safety, or you can choose to go forward towards growth. Growth must be chosen again and again, and fear must be overcome again and again. True living happens in the executive part of your brain, because that is where you choose who you want to be. So let's have a look if we've achieved what we set out to do. By now you should have an understanding about what is conflict and what is stress. You should be able to link it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You should be able to describe the 3 emotional states that links to conflict and stress. And then identify how the body and the mind reacts to conflict and stress. And then also, last but not least, to understand how the body and the emotions wants to fix stressful and conflicting situations immediately, and the danger within that, when your instant fix or your quick fix will not be a long-term solution. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to conflict and stress management. My name is Marie-Louise, and I'll see you next time.